Did you know that some of the most famous Western paintings were actually inspired by Japanese art? In the late 19th century, Japanese woodblock prints flooded Europe, sparking an artistic revolution known as Japonism, a movement that transformed Western art forever. But what exactly did these artists learn from Japan? And why did they become so fascinated with Japanese aesthetics? From composition to color, Japanese art introduced a completely new way of seeing the world, one that still influences art and design today. To understand how this artistic revolution began, we need to go back to a time when Japan was almost completely closed off from the world. For over 200 years during the Edo period, Japan's ruling shogunate strictly controlled foreign trade, keeping its culture largely unknown to the West. But in the mid-19th century, everything changed. In 1853, Japan reopened its ports to foreign trade, and soon, a wave of Japanese imports flooded into Europe. Among them were Japanese woodblock prints, known as ukiyo-e in Japan. These prints looked completely different from the grand historical and religious paintings of Europe. Instead of dramatic narratives, they captured everyday life with bustling city scenes, peaceful landscapes, and intimate moments of ordinary people. This fascination with Japanese art became known as Japonism. It was a movement that would reshape Western art for decades to come. Before long, Japanese goods such as woodblock prints, ceramics, and textiles became highly sought after, especially in cities like Paris and London. For many Western artists, it was unlike anything they had ever seen. This growing fascination reached a turning point at the 1867 Paris Exposition. For the first time, visitors could see woodblock prints, folding screens, and lacquerware up close, bringing Japanese art to a massive audience. Artists like Claude Monet, Vincent van Gogh, and Edgar Degas were captivated. They collected Japanese prints and studied them obsessively, drawn to their unique style and techniques. At the time, European artists were trained in Renaissance traditions, using perspective, shading, and symmetry to create depth and realism. But Japanese art broke all of these rules, and that's exactly what made it so exciting. Instead of creating depth through shading, ukiyo-e prints used flat, bold colors, creating strong contrasts. Their compositions were often asymmetrical, with subjects placed off-center or cropped at the edges, making them feel more dynamic and spontaneous. Unlike Western paintings, which followed strict rules of perspective, Japanese prints often depicted scenes from high vantage points or unusual angles. This offered a fresh way of seeing and experiencing space. And while European artists focused on grand historical and mythological subjects, ukiyo-e celebrated the beauty of everyday life, from bustling city streets to quiet landscapes and intimate moments from daily routines. These artistic choices completely transformed Western art. But how exactly did Japonism influence famous Western artists? Instead of just admiring Japanese prints, many painters began incorporating their techniques and aesthetics into their own work, and some even transformed their artistic style completely. One of the most notable artists to embrace this influence was Claude Monet, a leading pioneer of Impressionism. He collected hundreds of ukiyo-e prints and wove their principles into his own paintings, reshaping how he approached composition, color, and light. There's a popular story about how Monet first discovered Japanese prints. In 1871, while living in the Netherlands to escape the Franco-Prussian War, he walked into a shop in Amsterdam. There, he noticed Japanese prints being used as simple wrapping paper. Captivated by the engravings, he bought one on the spot. That moment is said to have sparked his lifelong passion for Japanese art. A few years later, in 1876, he painted La Japonisme, featuring his first wife, Camille, wearing a bright red kimono and standing against a backdrop decorated with Japanese paper fans. This was one of his earliest acknowledgements of Japanese culture in his art, but it was in his landscapes that the influence of Japanese aesthetics truly shaped his style. Ukiyo-e prints often used asymmetrical compositions and high vantage points, techniques that Monet adopted in his water lily series and Japanese bridge paintings. In fact, his love for Japanese art went beyond his paintings. At his home in Giverny, he created a Japanese-style garden with water lilies, a wooden bridge, and exotic plants. This garden inspired many of his most famous works, where the influence of Japanese art is clear. But Monet wasn't the only artist captivated by Japanese aesthetics. Another artist found inspiration in something completely different, focusing on bold colors, expressive outlines, and dramatic compositions. That artist was Vincent van Gogh. He didn't just admire Japanese prints, he reinterpreted them in his own style, blending their influence with his signature brushstrokes. One of his most famous studies of Japanese art is the courtesan, which was directly based on a print by Cassatt. Another example is Flowering Plum Orchard, a reimagining of Hiroshige's plum blossom print. In this work, Van Gogh preserved the Japanese composition, but infused it with his swirling brushstrokes and bold, unblended colors. Rather than creating depth through perspective, Van Gogh often flattened his compositions, giving them a more graphic, two-dimensional feel. He also embraced expanses of bold, unshaded colors, much like ukiyo-e prints, where vibrant hues were applied in strong, uninterrupted blocks. For Van Gogh, Japan wasn't just an artistic influence, it became an ideal. He once wrote, "All my work is based to some extent on Japanese art." Although he never visited Japan, he saw it as a paradise for artists, a place where color, simplicity, and harmony came together in ways that deeply resonated with him. Aside from Van Gogh, Edgar Degas also found inspiration in a different aspect of Japanese art, focusing on its unique perspectives and dynamic compositions. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Degas avoided staging Japoneries, which were Western paintings that featured models in kimonos or decorative Oriental props. Instead, he concentrated on the underlying artistic principles of Japanese aesthetics that resonated with him the most. Degas was fascinated by movement, spontaneity, and unusual framing, qualities he noticed in ukiyo-e prints. Rather than adopting Japanese art's bold color schemes, he focused on its innovative approach to composition. He often cropped his figures at the edges of the canvas, tilted perspectives, and captured his subjects as if they were seen in a fleeting moment. Degas also experimented with elongated formats that extended beyond traditional framing, creating a sense of movement and space. His compositions became more asymmetrical, breaking away from the rigid balance of classical art. Degas' close friend and fellow artist Henri Cassatt was equally inspired by Japanese woodblock prints. She once declared that she hated conventional art and was inspired by Japanese art to explore new ways of portraying everyday moments in women's lives. After attending a major exhibition of Japanese prints at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1890, she created a set of 10 color etchings directly inspired by their subjects, compositions, and technical innovations. Her work, much like Degas', reflected a deep appreciation for Japanese aesthetics, reinterpreted through a Western lens. The last artist we'll talk about is Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He wasn't just inspired by Japanese prints, he modernized them. While artists like Monet and Van Gogh absorbed Japanese aesthetics into their paintings, Lautrec took ukiyo-e in a different direction, one that helped shape modern poster art and graphic design. Ukiyo-e prints used strong outlines, flat planes of color, and high-contrast compositions. Lautrec embraced this approach. He removed unnecessary details and used bold contours to define his figures instead of shading. His color palettes were simple, often limited to a few vivid tones that stood out against neutral backgrounds, creating a bold, high-impact style that grabbed attention. Lautrec was also fascinated by performers, similar to ukiyo-e artists who depicted kabuki actors and courtesans. But instead of geishas and samurai, his subjects were cabaret dancers, singers, and entertainers from the nightlife of Montmartre. His posters weren't just advertisements, they captured the energy and personality of Parisian nightlife with the same stylization and dynamism found in ukiyo-e. Typography was another area where Lautrec reflected Japanese aesthetics. In ukiyo-e, text was often integrated into the artwork. Lautrec applied this approach in his posters, blending hand-drawn lettering seamlessly into his designs. His typography was bold and expressive, enhancing the overall composition. Lautrec reinvented Japanese art. He adapted its simplicity, movement, and graphic quality to create something entirely his own. His work bridged the gap between fine art and commercial design, helping lay the foundation for modern advertising and visual communication. Japonisme was about inspiration, transformation, and the blending of cultures. These artists didn't just borrow from Japanese aesthetics, they reimagined them, creating something entirely new and shaping the course of modern art. Which artist inspired you the most? And what are your thoughts on Japonism? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.